Hello there and welcome to the continuing sessions in our program on email etiquette and how indeed to regard email and how to use it effectively. In this particular session, we are going to go through what is called the email disclaimer. And this is something that has become very important in business today, in e-commerce today. In view of the number of lawsuits that exist and that can possibly happen, it's important that we go through this particular section so you are more in tune with what it means and how your company can protect itself. And you as a manager and executive of a company can know how to conduct your business in a professional way. There are lots of penalties concerning the contents of corporate emails, and companies are becoming increasingly aware that by simply using emails, they are indeed exposing themselves to a lot of legal threats. You do have to be careful what you say in an email. It is very important because it is the face of your company, and depending on what you say, you could end up with a legal case. Some companies are trying to solve these issues by banning email from their organization completely so that this doesn't have any effect on them. But I think there are better ways in which companies can protect themselves. It's very difficult to ban email. So the idea is to look for solutions that can legally protect you. As you know, there's a lot of information that circulates out in emails, and therefore you do need to safeguard your organization. Apart from legal disclaimers, companies can use other tools to protect themselves against the legal implications of email. We have gone through email policy, developing and implementing an email policy, and using email filtering and antivirus software. This is something that also will protect your company. But what we are going to do now is to explore the use of email disclaimers and the related email law. Are you aware of these things in email? Does your company have disclaimers that they send out with their email letters to customers or to business partners, etc.? Have you thought about this before? What kind of disclaimers are visible in your email system for your organization? First of all, what are email disclaimers? Perhaps you may not be too sure of this, or it's maybe a new subject to you. Email disclaimers are simply statements that are attached before your actual email or after your email, or at the bottom of your email. These statements are usually of a legal nature, not too intricately so, but their intention is meant to come across in a legal way, so people stand up and they take notice of them. These legal statements can also be used for marketing purposes as well, and a disclaimer can also be used on a website. But we are only going to cover the use of disclaimers in email communications and the related email law. You may have seen on certain sites that you open up or on certain emails that come to you that the company that sent that says that this disclaimer means that this is just their interpretation, for example, of this particular subject, and that they should not be held responsible if there is any other kind of interpretation of it, etc. Disclaimers are things that take away the actual claim of anybody to say that that company did something incorrectly. So why do you need disclaimers? There are several reasons why, and after we discuss this together, you might decide to add disclaimers to your emails as well. And the reasons can be categorized into two sort of areas. We have the legal reasons for it, to protect the company against being sued, and the marketing reasons as well. Let's look at the legal reasons why you would use a disclaimer. The contents of your emails are very, very important. But it is not really certain whether an email disclaimer will protect you from liability in a court of law 100%. However, it has been established that email disclaimers will certainly help your case in some situations, and that you might be seen to be trying to protect yourselves and not be liable for certain things because you have made an attempt to protect yourself. So the use of disclaimers, even though it is not certain that it will protect you 100%, it is definitely certain that they are recommended always as a supporting way of protecting you. There are 6 legal threats that disclaimers can protect you against. So let's take a look at those now. First up, we have breach of confidentiality. By including a disclaimer in your email or in the promotional material you're sending out that warns that the content of this email is confidential, you can protect your company against the exposure of confidential information. That means if the receiver breaches this confidentiality, they could be liable. So this is saying that if you're sending a letter to a business partner and at the bottom of your letter you are saying that this letter is confidential and that it is not meant to be circulated to those people who are not authorized or involved, etc., that is a disclaimer. And if for some reason the person who receives that email sends that letter to people and has not been confidential about the contents of that letter, then you have the right, you could sue them. They have not taken note of that disclaimer at the bottom and have not been aware that this is a confidential issue. So therefore, this is where confidentialities are important in business. There's a lot of information that goes from A to B to C to D, and that information is not meant to be shared with everybody. So you protect yourself against the exposure of your confidential information going out to other people who don't really have the right to see it. Sometimes there is an accidental breach of confidentiality. It could be that an employee receives a confidential email from someone and by accident forwards that to the wrong person. Now this can happen. The employee and therefore the company could be liable. But it is a genuine mistake, and this can easily happen at times. It could be that if an email is wrongly addressed, it can be forwarded to a postmaster, for example, on the servers, who might not be authorized to read the mail, but they will read it because it's been forwarded to them by mistake. It could be that an email is easily intercepted. And if you therefore include a statement at the end of your mail which says that the message is only intended for the addressee, and that if anybody else receives the email, by mistake they are bound to confidentiality, then this could protect you. So if you include that statement, that disclaimer at the bottom of that particular email or any email, then you are protected in a way if the information by mistake falls into the wrong hands. So this is why when you're dealing with business over the internet and you're dealing with confidentialities as well, we forget the fact that actually a lot of the information we're sharing and sending is very confidential. So it is important that you look at this for your particular organization and check to see whether you are using disclaimers, particularly these two where we have breach of confidentiality and also accidental breach of confidentiality. Disclaimers will protect you. They don't need to be long, they can be short, but if they're in place, then at least you have some protection. Otherwise, you have no protection at all. And you have no recourse if information goes to the wrong place. And if people use that information for their own gain. In your organization or your department, if one of your employees sends on an email or forwards an email that may contain a virus, and this is a very common thing. Viruses are everywhere. We do need to have great protection against them. But if your email is sent out and it's got a virus in it, your company can be sued. This is of particular importance now. People do not want to get viruses in their systems. Viruses can destroy and shut down whole systems and whole companies. And some companies take this particular transmission of viruses very, very seriously. I'm sure yours does. It must do. So rather than being sued by the other company who received your virus-laden email, it pays for you to have a disclaimer ready for this. You can implement a very good virus checker, of course, and most PCs have those in place. Most systems do. But apart from doing that, the checker that blocks viruses entering or leaving the company via email, you can also warn in your disclaimer that the email can possibly contain viruses and that the receiver is responsible for checking and deleting viruses at their end. That is a disclaimer that will protect you. You have done all your checks, and you can, in your disclaimer, say that it's really up to the recipient to have systems and virus checkers in place to ensure that they don't receive any viruses. This will protect you, and I'm sure that it needs to be emphasized how important that this really is. Viruses are everywhere. Even when you stick your handy drive into somebody else's computer, you've got to be aware that that may contain a virus. So do be very careful about this. Entering into contracts. You are, of course, in your business, entering into contracts all the time. And written communication, including email, not just written formal documents, but contractual documents that are in the form of email, can be used to form binding legal contracts as well, if the individuals have actual or apparent authority to do so. So your emails can become legally binding. That's what this means. You may think, oh no, it's only a written paper document that is legally binding. Well, do be very careful of that point. Email documents can become legally binding to certain contracts. So if you don't wish to have certain employees to be able to form binding contracts by email, then you could include a statement that says that any form of contract needs to be confirmed by the person's manager. That is another kind of disclaimer that you can put in place within your systems that will protect you and protect you from employees who don't have authority, so to speak, to make legal statements and binding statements. Are you beginning to see how important disclaimers are? Depending on the nature of your business, it really will pay for you to think about these things. Think about your email policy and whether also you have email disclaimers. Sometimes, by law, a person is obliged to take care when giving advice that somebody else relies on. You have to be very careful that the advice that you are giving is correct and that it is accurate. If, for example, an employee of yours were to give professional advice in an email, your company might be liable for the effect of that advice that maybe the recipient or the third party relies upon. After all, you said it, and it seemed professional, and so we followed your advice and we did that. But what happens if something goes wrong? In that case, your company is liable. Unless you may try to put in place a suitable disclaimer that could protect you from this kind of liability. So be aware that if you are offering professional advice about something, think about whether if somebody does use that advice and something goes wrong, it may be that you need to protect yourself in that particular instance and prepare a suitable disclaimer. It could mean in the content of the disclaimer that you have provided this information to be interpreted by the recipient and you are not responsible for the consequences of any actions that that recipient takes. It could be that this is part of your disclaimer. Then we come to the employer's liability. Although you really are totally, and this is very true, you really are totally responsible for the actions of all your employees. That comes with being the employer, including the content of emails that they send. A disclaimer, as I said, can decrease your liability. It can help to protect you. Perhaps not 100%, but certainly it will be a certain way to protect you. So if a company can show that it has correctly instructed its employees not to send defamatory statements or damaging statements or untruthful statements, then this could help in saying that there is no responsibility on your part if the employee does breach those rules. You can demonstrate this simply by including a disclaimer to that effect, using those sorts of words, and by implementing such an email policy that clearly warns employees against misuse of email. So there are all different kinds of disclaimers that can go at the top or before an email or a document, or at the footer, at the bottom, after the signature part of your email. And these are designed not to complicate procedures, but they're designed to help things move along more smoothly, so there's no issues involved, so that there may be less legal action depending on your industry. In the United States, which is a very litigious society where people sue anybody else at the drop of a hat, and that this is an important part of the way you do business, then you will find that disclaimers certainly are in vogue. They certainly are used by every single company. It's very much the case now in many other countries around the world. And the reason is that there needs to be protection. We are using the internet now, which is a totally new way of doing business, and there are so many things that can go wrong. And what is written is very, very public. Even though you may think it's not, it really does end up that way. And also things are recorded. There are records kept. Data is stored. Data is saved. And so there's everything there in writing. So the idea behind disclaimers is meant to really be a positive one, and one that can really serve to protect you. I know organisations that will not even begin to use email unless the disclaimers are in place. And I think that's probably what you might need to do when you look at the company that you're working for right now. What kind of industry are you in? Are you providing a service? If you are providing a service, then disclaimers definitely are necessary for your email communications. So let's just be mindful of one thing. There is nothing that can protect you against defamatory content. 100% anyway. And the most that a disclaimer can accomplish in this respect is to reduce the responsibility of the company, since the company can prove that the company has acted responsibly and done everything in its power to stop employees from committing these offences. So at least you're making an effort as a company to not be totally responsible for what happens with emails. Your staff are your staff, your employees are your employees. And mostly, let's hope that your employees are satisfied ones, because if they are, then you may not really have any problem with this kind of situation and negative statements being sent out to customers, for example. So the idea here is to keep your staff motivated, to keep them happy in their jobs, and the less likely the chance of you having problems or being sued. But do bear in mind, there are disgruntled employees in companies, and when that happens, people become very nasty, very devious, and if they make up their mind that they want to bring a company down, then certainly they will. Certainly they will try to do that. If you keep up to date with all the things going on in the internet and cyberspace and cyber crime, you will also notice that there are special police force units and special monitoring and security units set up to monitor all this kind of thing going on. So generally, try to remember that if your employees are happy, then most likely there won't be a problem. Apart from the legal reasons that you might need a disclaimer, and they're very valid reasons, aren't they? I think they are. Then a disclaimer can also be added to serve your marketing purposes of your organisation. It could be there to add marketing information. Let's take a look. Disclaimers can be used to add perhaps a company address, a URL or a slogan if wished. And in some countries, companies are required to state the company's particulars on any written communication. This is the law. And since email is also written, it is probably best to include this in emails as well. So this is also where it helps your marketing activities, adding marketing information. Disclaimers can also be used to convey professional image to your organisation or to the recipient. By adding disclaimers to emails, your company conveys in some ways a very professional and trustworthy image. It looks good. It looks good when people see this because it means you've done your homework. You know a bit about the technology and you know what's important in business to protect yourself. So apart from deterring any possible adversaries from suing you, it will also convey awareness and professionalism to your customers. So disclaimers can be very, very positive and very beneficial to your marketing strategies, to conveying and building up an image of your organisation. If you haven't really noticed disclaimers on emails or websites that you visit on the internet or on emails that you receive, start to take notice. Start to see indeed whether your clients or the people who write to you actually have a disclaimer on their email. And you yourself, as I said, go back to your office, go and look and see what it is that your company has set up in terms of disclaimers. And see if you think one should be there or you should recommend that disclaimers go on, then make some recommendation about that. Do something about it, because ultimately it is there for the protection of the company and also in some ways protection for the employee. So about disclaimers, do we add them later or do we put them before? If you put the disclaimer before, there is more chance that it will be read. People will see it and they'll notice it immediately they open up that email and they'll pay attention. However, the downside of that is that it doesn't look good really, and on an email particularly, and it might interfere more with the email communications and the content and what you're trying to say in your email. So it could be a little bit messy and sometimes it might put people off. But anyway, there is a way to do it. You can put it either before, or you can put it at the end of your email. The choice of whether you prepend it or append it to your email will probably depend on how secure and confidential your email communications need to be and how important email is to your company. If it is of the highest priority, your security issues, then you'd probably prepend it. And this is a procedure that you would need to sort out with your email policy. Where is that disclaimer going to go, before or after that email? For example, a legal company or a financial institution might choose to prepend disclaimers because they are sending highly confidential information. So they want to make sure immediately that someone opens their emails that, bing, this is what we are saying to you. This is our disclaimer. Please read it and take note. However, on the other side of the coin, a company selling books, for example, or flowers over the internet, which is a far minor thing to be doing, not requiring such great legal support, would probably prefer to append the disclaimer, put it later on. So this choice depends particularly on the security status, security requirements of your organization and the information that they share with their customers over email. Now, there are internal and external disclaimers. So internally in your organization, you might have to look at whether you use a disclaimer. It is best to include disclaimers in some ways on internal as well as external emails, since there are legal issues that apply to both. It could be that viruses and contract issues will mainly apply to external emails. The confidentiality and employer's liability aspects will be just as important, or even more important for internal mail as they are for external mail. So you have to make your decision here as to whether you do attach disclaimers internally as well. Some organizations do this. There have been several cases where employees have sued their employers for emails internally because there have been sexual or racist or offensive remarks circulating in the office. Mark my words, this does happen. Not everybody is nice in organizations. People who have a grudge, people who don't like the system, who want to create chaos within an organization, can do anything when it comes to the internet. There are very, very smart people out there who know how to break in and really delve and intrude into email confidentialities as well. So be careful. There are people who may take it upon themselves to send negative content internally. Maybe they want to start disruptive activities. Maybe they want to cause the downfall of some particular person. So their intent is not very good. So this does happen, and perhaps an internal disclaimer might be something that you need. As for the confidentiality, this might even be more of an issue for internal email, since not only is there quite a good chance that a colleague might accidentally read a confidential email, that could happen, you know. An insider in an organization will recognize immediately the importance of information much faster than an outsider. So just remember, there are confidentialities within your own departments that you have to be wary of and that you don't want to be circulated. So email disclaimers within your department might be the way that you have to look at things to protect your particular department, to protect the confidentiality of the information that you are working with. Departmental email disclaimers. It really does depend on the function of a person, on that person's job. And depending on that, you might wish to add different kinds of disclaimers. Let's take a look at some as simple examples. For instance, somebody in a sales department might need a statement saying that all quotes are only valid for 30 days. That might be a disclaimer that you put on the bottom of your quotation or when you're sending your information out, that this price will only stand for 30 days. So there you are, you highlight it in a disclaimer, a statement that has a certain piece of information in it so the person who receives it knows exactly what's going on with this particular pricing. It could be another example here where the accounts department might need a disclaimer that concentrates more on the confidential nature of the information. And another example for you. Your technical support department might want to include a notice or a disclaimer in their emails that they cannot be held liable for the consequences of their advice. So these are all sorts of disclaimers that you can put on various interdepartmental emails or emails within your organization, just there to protect those particular departments. Are you thinking now about your own department? If you are working in sales, for example, or if you are indeed working in the technical support department in a telecommunications company or something like that, what kind of notices can you write on the bottom to protect yourself in a reasonable sense? Of course, you can't protect yourself against everything, but there is a need sometimes to protect yourself against the way that products are used, for example. I remember once that I bought a washing machine, and this washing machine had in the instructions also included a kind of disclaimer. It said that potatoes, can you believe it, potatoes were not meant to be put in the washing machine, and if it was found that this was done, then the company would not be able to repair this washing machine if it was damaged in any way. So that was a very amusing disclaimer that I remember once seeing. A little bit of fun we're having here with disclaimers, but as you can see, they are there to protect the organization. So really do think about them, and think about them in a very positive light. How can you create a specific disclaimer? Well, it's best to make the disclaimer statement as specific as possible. That's how you do it. This will really add to the weight of what you're trying to say. So if you are specific, then that means you are very, very clear, and there's no chance of misunderstanding. For instance, instead of saying, the company will not accept liability, you could say, the company XYZ, the name of your company, for example, will not accept liability. That is being very specific, so there's no question or no doubt at all. It is better to mention the actual company name. To make things more specific in your disclaimer, some software products actually allow you to merge fields in your disclaimer, and therefore you can pack that disclaimer with certain specific information that might include the recipient's name. If you, for instance, can include the recipient's name in your disclaimer, then that really is very, very specific and very powerful. For example, you could say, this email and its contents are only intended for Mr. XYZ. When you say that, then that means that if anybody else, for any reason, acts on that email, then they are abusing the system. They are the ones who are in the wrong, and you are protected. So you could use this as your disclaimer. Quite often when you are sending messages, you say, for the attention of Mr. So-and-so. Well, then why don't you make that a little bit more specific and say in your disclaimer, this email and its contents are only intended for That is far stronger than just a simple statement. This will make it very clear to whom the email is addressed, and that if any other person actually reads that information, then they are bound to confidentiality. So this is an important aspect that you can put in as well, internally in your disclaimers. Also, supervisor's name. In the case where you want to limit the entering into binding contracts via email, you could mention the name of the supervisor who needs to confirm a contract in writing. For example, you could say, this employee is not authorized to conclude any binding contracts without the express written confirmation by Mr. Y. So, with that simple disclaimer, you have made a statement that unless Mr. Y has written confirmation of this, then this contract is not binding. So these are there to protect you, and they make a lot of sense, depending, of course, on the nature of your business and what you are sending in those emails. So you can be definite about who should read this email. Some people say for the eyes of Mr. So-and-so only. That's an expression that we can use too. But I think if you keep it quite formal, then that is very, very clear, and it's looked upon as very serious. You may also construct or create your disclaimers around a date. Perhaps the date is what you want to make noticed. It might be useful if you can include a date in the disclaimer, since this might help when determining to which part of the email the disclaimer applies. So dates can really help to make the disclaimer much more specific as well. By a certain date, by such and such a year, all of these things really outline your disclaimer very, very clearly. Sometimes there are disadvantages of using disclaimers. It could be that you're quite happy using disclaimers, but do be careful. One of the advantages of using disclaimers can be that some emails contain long lists of disclaimers. Since every time that you send an email, disclaimers are usually added to every email, even if it already contains one. So imagine this scenario. If you were to send an email, then you receive a reply, and you reply back. There will be 2 of your disclaimers at the bottom of the email. This can sometimes end up being a very long list. And so when somebody prints out that email, they may end up printing out 1 or 2 pages just full of disclaimers. So in some ways that's actually very annoying. That is a disadvantage, and a lot of people don't like to see that happen. They really want to avoid that. So the best way to try to avoid that sort of thing is to try to keep things very, very simple. Keep that disclaimer as short as possible and distinguish it from the rest of the text. You could add a line of asterisks, for example, at the top and the bottom of the disclaimer, so it stands out, so it doesn't look like it's part of the email. You could use a different color, or a different font, or a different font size, or you could bold it all. Alternatively, you could use a disclaimer program that can detect the existence of a previous disclaimer and suppress it, and suppress the adding of another disclaimer. That's some software that is available to you as well. So these are things that come up when you use disclaimers. The intention of a disclaimer is to protect your organization from any misconduct. Basically, that's what it is, or any misrepresentation. And in summarizing this particular part of our email etiquette, it's important to note that it's your choice. It's your choice of your company whether you do this or not. It's not mandatory. There's no law about it. But bear in mind the fact that if you are in business and you do want to do it professionally, using a disclaimer can have a professional impact on your image, so long as they're used in the right way, so long as they are simple and that they are specific. So thank you for sharing your time and going through this session with me. I do hope that when you go back to your workplace, you will start to take a look at your emails. And as I have always said throughout our programs, try to review the knowledge that you've gained. Try to apply it. Have a look on the internet now. Have a look at websites and take a look at the attachments that come to you through the normal course of the day. Look for disclaimers. Try to get an idea of the different kinds of disclaimers, and you will see from what we've gone through together that yes, there are varying types of disclaimers. If you feel you'd like to discuss this point further with your superiors or with the IT departments in your organization, then by all means go ahead. Have some discussion on it. Decide for yourselves whether indeed you do really require to have disclaimers. Even if you begin with one, just a confidentiality disclaimer on the bottom of your emails, at least that's a way to begin to protect yourself in some part against misuse of the information in your organization. Thank you once again for your attention.